Out there in YouTube land, Dan here from Geekcast Radio doing another graphic thoughts video. This is where I go through some of the recent graphic novels I've been reading, share my thoughts and opinions on them. As the year is winding down quickly, each and every week, I feel like 2019 will be here sooner than later. I'm trying to catch up on a lot of the 2018 notable graphic novels I have not been able to read yet. So that is the majority of this week's stack of books. I do have one older book that I'll get to, but if you're wondering why there are so many recent books, that's kind of why. I'll start with this, which is Forward by Maas. And this is a story kind of centering on two women, both are lesbian women that are dealing with some sort of loss or grief in their life. One is dealing with a breakup that went bad, and just trying to, at this time, really burying herself in her work, in her life, even though there are people trying to say you need to kind of get out there. And she still has those desires, clearly, as demonstrated in some of these sequences where you can tell that she's looking for that person, but there's hesitation there. Certainly she feels, you can see, fractured from things that have happened. And we also have another woman who's going through something similar, but obviously her situation is that her wife just recently passed away, and of cancer, and she's going through that process and the challenges there of trying to date, of, is it right or wrong, is it too soon? Like, how do you even strike up those conversations, and kind of how the awkwardness, the sloppiness of it. And these two lives are kind of going parallel with one another, eventually meet, and kind of go, I would say, somewhat in unexpected directions and somewhat not. I'd say if there's one major knock for me for this book, is that the inevitability of where the story was heading kind of felt that it limited a lot of the drama that was building up, because it's all about them looking for one another. In the structure of it, you kind of could see where it was eventually going to go. So that was the one thing holding it back. It's not necessarily a book that's trying to trick you by any ways, but what I thought was really effective and well done was the dialogue of the characters. It had almost like a mumblecore feel to how naturalistic it was, awkward, often bumping into one another, the silences that are there, the trying to read body language, and how you could try to interpret one thing and then it end up meaning something else, and it just the challenge of just dating in general, which luckily I've not had to do in quite some time, and I'm very happy for that. But just piling up everything else. But dating is a piece of this, but obviously it's going for something much deeper. Kind of just, again, going after how we react to grief and loss, and the way we react to one another. And I thought it did an effective job of doing that. Certainly the art too did a great job expressing that emotion. I don't know if this will rank as one of the best books for me of the year, but looking at, I do each year top 100, I definitely think it would find a place in there someplace, just because it's, I think, a great perspective and telling a very universal story, even if the life of those characters aren't universal, and just seeing what is similar, how things are different, but also just I think there's pieces of this we could all relate to in some way. So I guess I had one minor nitpick with it, but overall it was a really solid book. Something that's completely different, I don't think it could be much more different, is One Run Wild. And this is a fantasy story about that is the art is very unique. It's non-descriptive is the word that kind of comes to mind, because there is not much description. You kind of just wake up and you're in this story. It's about two children that find themselves in a world where they're the only humans that are left. Everyone else has been transformed into these animals, some of which are kind of giving in to their animalistic instincts, some of which do recognize that they were once human, and they're trying to find their way, and eventually discover, like, how can they save this world, can they save themselves, and that fight against kind of everything that's out there. And I struggled there. The art is fantastic to look at. Sometimes, just by the nature of it, it could be, it leads a lot up to your imagination to understand everything that's going on at times, especially when things get really hectic. But I thought it was gorgeous, very eventful, inventive, and I thought the story itself was certainly intriguing, although a little bit, I think, a little more description might have been helpful in a way, or I don't know. At times I felt a little bit lost, but I thought the themes of it were strong. Certainly this battle between your nature, the animalistic nature of these characters, and kind of there's that need to be safe or get through this world, especially as a parent. The idea of it all came from their mother, who kind of helped change this world for their safety, and the parallels of just trying to raise a child when the world is just around them and you're trying to do them harm. And I don't know if that's necessarily where the book was going, but that's kind of what I took out of it. But it's certainly different. And if you're a person that just likes to pick up a book and read something that they have not read before or see something different, it definitely has that. It's a great adventure because you're seeing all these different worlds, all these different characters, and animals of all different shapes and sizes. There's a great, basically gigantic panda. This fox is really the main character that seeps him through. And then there's this doe that is probably the most interesting character out of all of them, who is one of the person leading the pack chasing these children, but also there's a little bit much more to that character, than you at first think. So it develops into, I think, something that's a little bit unexpected, and I don't want to kind of ruin it, but I don't know. It was rather kind of, I didn't know anything about this book going into it. I'm like, that looks intriguing. Let me check it out. And I gotta say, I feel like I need to read through this a couple times to fully grasp it, and probably pick up a lot of things I missed, especially through the first few pages, because there is so much. There's not a lot of dialogue, not a lot of conversation. So I kind of went through probably a little bit too quick on the first run, but I do think that this is worthy of a read for sure. So. This very different book. I keep saying that, but we have Clockwork Lives, and this is I guess an anthology book, but not necessarily in the sense of it's a different stories put together. It's one story with connecting stories. What it follows is this. We first get this introduction into this world where this woman, her father passes away, and she's kind of getting ready to get her inheritance. She just wants to kind of live a small, quiet life after her father dies and move on with her life. But she soon discovers that her father won't do that. In order to get her inheritance, he gives her this book. This takes place in a magical world. He's an alchemist, and in order to get what she feels like she deserves, she needs to travel the world. And there's this book she's given that will tell people's life stories. If they drop a piece of a drop of their blood onto the pages, it will write their life story, and they'll be able to see it and read it. And he wants her to travel the world to collect the life stories of different individuals. And once the book is full, she can get her inheritance. And the thing with it too is that she's like, okay, at first I'm just going to go around town, get people's different stories. But in her small town, often the people that she goes to, their stories don't really give her much. There's a couple pages. They don't last all that long, and she soon realizes that she's going to have to do something else, because simply trying to go to her town folk who just kind of she goes to a local farmer who was born. His dad was a farmer. He became a farmer, and his story was only a few pages. She then begins to kind of travel and realize, okay, I have to go around and collect these different stories. And each time she collects a story, the first one being her father's, it then cuts to that actual story. And the art does change, sometimes drastically, sometimes not that drastically, and we get all these different the life story of all of these characters that eventually connect, and we also see her story as she's going through this world. And it's kind of steampunk-esque without being too arrogant about it, or sometimes steampunk I think can be a little bit too much, and it's just but there are pieces of it where I think, okay, it's certainly not a world where they have this flying machine that is kind of like a train, but uses the cross between a train and a balloon. And it's a world where magic kind of exists, but not necessarily in the sense of witches and wizards. More so, it's more engineering based in a way. But I thought it was a good job of just giving you all these different stories, some of which were better than others, and it really expanded this world out into relatively massive, because of it just each bit expanded it further and further and further. My personal favorite story, if I can find it, was one of the librarians who find this magical mirror that allows them to go to different, which is this story, goes to like different dimensions within this reality. And unlike, something, when they go to these different dimensions, they just stay within this location and their actual library and getting different books from different people. Each book, they'll be able to see an individual from their reality, and a new one get their life story, and just to see how all these things diverge. So even though they have the power to travel universe to universe, they're very cautious with it and don't go outside of their location. As you can see, they have this magical mirror. Wow. It felt very much like almost like a Neil Gaiman story compared to all the other mini stories. Like that story by itself, I thought was strong enough just to be its own short book. And anytime you have a setup like this, when you have a multiple short stories together, some are stronger than others, but of all of them, that one stood out. And overall, I thought it was actually quite good. I thought the creative team put together quite a nice little package with this. I don't know if this will be a series of books. It certainly could be, because of, like I mentioned, how much this world is expanded. You really and you could dive a lot deeper. There's this clockmaker that's kind of in charge of everything, with this secret army, and you get bits and pieces of how this world kind of coalesces with one another. But as it goes on, I feel like you could probably have a few more volumes of this. So quite good. I was not expecting much from it, and at first I was just like, okay, this is going to be a little bit repetitive. I did feel like people gave her blood a lot easier than you would expect. It's like, you gotta have some blood, yes. I felt like that would be a longer conversation, but I guess that's the world they lived in. I don't know, but it's my nitpick over others. Why small, good story. The one book that I read that is not new is The Spirit, a very iconic character, but this is Darwyn Cooke's run on The Spirit, the volume 1 of it, and Darwyn Cooke is probably in my top 5 of favorite comic book artists, and I never read his Spirit run. This was at the library, so I'm like, I gotta give it a shot. And not unexpectedly, it was great because it's Darwyn Cooke. It makes me so sad that Darwyn Cooke didn't have a bigger career than he did. How he kind of got pigeonholed into being this type of artist, this type of comic creator for the most part, dealing with more of the Silver Age, Golden Age kind of retellings of books. Obviously, we got New Frontier, which is a fantastic book. Also, Batman Ego, which I think is amazing, his Parker series. But I feel like, and he was great on Catwoman as well. But with The Spirit, and I have not read a lot of the Spirit comics, to be honest. I've read here and there. I did see the movie in theaters, and it's a very odd movie. Actually, kind of reading this makes me want to go back and rewatch that film to see if it's better than I remember. I just remember going into it, it felt like it looked a lot like Sin City at the time. I was young and stupid, and it was very different and odd. So I wonder if I went back to it and watched it again, if I would actually like it more with a little bit more background. And each issue they're mostly all one-shot issues. The first issue is about this news anchor that fakes a kidnapping, but ends up being kind of a real kidnapping by the end of it. The Spirit comes to save her. Dealing with those classic dames in distress. As I mentioned, not being huge into the world of The Spirit, I don't know how many of these characters come from his world or Darwyn Cooke's creations, but ultimately, I just love staring at Darwyn Cooke's writing or his art. He's such a fantastic storyteller. I love the way he draws. I see why he was kind of made into that Silver Age classic storyteller guy, but because his art does fit that style, but he can certainly do more than that. He also had that before Watchmen stuff he worked on. So if you've never read a Spirit comic, I felt like this was a great way to kind of get into it. And if you're looking just into that classic, noir, kitschy look, very much with it does not hide the fact, just the way the characters are written, especially the women characters. Like, you could not, I feel like in a way, write women that way today. In some ways good, in some ways bad, but at least I would say, like, you think you have this this character that's like this classic damsel in distress, but by the end of it you realize her plans are much more notorious than that, and she's maybe the most dangerous one in that room. But just again, fantastic to look at. And I kind of hope to find these individual issues in the wild someday, just because they're great. Like I said, you can pick up each issue and read it without having read the previous one for the most part. And I kind of miss comics that did that, but I know I'm kind of rambling here, but ultimately it gave me exactly what I expected. If you said Darwyn Cooke doing the Spirit, I don't know how it holds up to Spirit fans, if they like this run or not. I don't even know what the general consensus is of this book. You hear a lot of people talk about Darwyn Cooke, but I feel like his run in the Spirit's not one that is often mentioned. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because it came later in his career or what have you, but I would recommend picking it up. All right, the last book I read, and I try to keep my favorite for the last, was Kabul Disco. And this was a book about a comic book creator who went to Afghanistan shortly after the quote-unquote end of the American-Afghan War, in the mid-2000s, to try to write and create comics for the newly formed Afghan government. And the hope was to try to, I want to say propaganda, but at least try to create communication, because you're dealing with a populace that mostly can't read, to try to explain things like how the government system works, like how to sanitation, just general, just life things that they were kind of kept away from them under Taliban rule, and how do you try to educate the populace in a way that everyone can understand, because you're dealing with people from all different places, different languages, from different tribes, but imagery is where that can come in. So getting into this, I was expecting this to be, you're talking about Afghanistan after the war and how horrible things were, eventually with how the country was dealing with suicide bombers and the constant violence that's still going on today. So I thought this would be kind of that book. It's much more comedic than I ever expected. And I guess the thing that kind of had me going back to was something like Good Morning Vietnam. This individual fish out of water going into this other world, trying to figure out their way and doing their part. It's not, I'd say, as he's not. This isn't like he's going to this Afghanistan and you see the major impact he has on the world. He's really just a small piece that is in this ever-changing situation, but you also see that, like, at first things kind of went okay, and and just the naivete of thinking the war is over, everything's okay now, and then how that quickly dissolved and things became more and more dangerous. But there's always this great sense of humor. It doesn't diminish or feel disrespectful. Obviously, you're dealing with a really serious situation where some horrific things have happened, but it's just this person's perspective and their life story. And the challenges that you would face as a comic creator in Afghanistan, trying to write comics under crazy deadlines, dealing with a world that you don't really know, with a language you don't really speak, and a lot of more colorful characters. It also, I think, did a good job of just painting a much different picture of what the people are there, because you get kind of an idea from what you see in the news or different documentaries, but I think they're having parties, there's nice restaurants, and things obviously have changed as the war kind of raged on, but it certainly showed that Afghanistan. I think have a notion of Afghanistan. We always think of farms and caves and things like that, fortunately, but this thing got into show just there's much more to it, and there's just some great meta humor here too. I can't pull out the actual page, but there's a joke about utilizing the same page over and over again, the same panel to save money, and how they're doing that themselves. I'm obviously ruining the joke, but still, like, even when things are kind of getting dire, you have a lot, and you see him kind of not want to leave. He found a place. He's a comic creator that was not getting any work, and at first he doesn't want to go, but eventually, as things go more and more, people begin getting kidnapped. Things become more serious. The danger becomes more and more apparent, and by the end of it, like, he obviously comes home. And then what's kind of cool at the end is that we get some of the actual comics and things like that were created, that covered things like the Afghanistan Constitution. And at the time, they're like trying to, like, what should we who's in Parliament? How do we draw people in Parliament and what they look like? And there was none at that time. So they were literally trying to shape the government of Afghanistan just through comics, because they trying to explain to the people like what their rights are, how to vote, and it shows you just how powerful the medium of comics can be without ever feeling like it's trying to prop up its importance, saying look how great we are. But it was just really fascinating, this piece of culture, of things that happened, and then there's some imagery of actual pictures of his time there. The piece that doesn't really get talked about, right? Like we hear a lot about obviously the battles, the wars, the laws, the individuals, but like the little pieces of how you have to day-to-day life, how do you communicate with people, and something like this I think does that, but also it's just a well-told story. So it's up there in just my enjoyment factor and just fascination with books this year. Out of all the books I talked about today, this is by far my favorite out of all of them, and one of my favorite books of the year. Currently probably someplace within at least my top 20, if not higher. I've read out a lot of comics this year, so I would highly advise picking this up. This is done by humanoids who are doing more and more better stuff. At first I thought, it's a Fantagraphics book, or First Second, but because it kind of has a First Second vibe to it, but it's from a different publisher. So I believe he's actually a French creator, I should mention, in this. I think it was just recently translated this year. So all right, but I know I rambled a lot this episode. There was a lot to talk about, so if you stuck with me, I appreciate it. So if you want to check out more of my stuff, check out Geekcast Radio. Also have some interesting things in the work. I actually might be getting back to more written reviews soon. That more to come on that shortly, and obviously the Comic Concierge podcast will be coming back strong. I've booked a few episodes, so in the next few weeks be on the lookout for that. So we'll be talking about Extremity shortly, back to the weekly Recommends podcast, and as well as more Howard County. So a lot of fun things in the works, and as I mentioned, coming soon in a few months, top 100 comics of 2018. If there are any books you feel like I should read because they will be in your top 5, anything that's outside of the norm, like obviously, I know Mr. Miracle is really, it just won an Eisner, but any books like this, any original graphic novels that perhaps are not getting the attention they deserve, I'm always about. I love getting recommendations, so I love just picking up a book, reading it, and then sometimes you'll get something you don't like, sometimes you'll get something that you adored, and that's why the library is amazing, because it's free, it doesn't cost anything. Alrighty, well, just remember, comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thank you for watching.